All right. So for our asynchronous day today, Friday, January 7th, we're going to be continuing to take a look at the skeletal system. So I'm kind of jumping around between chapter 6 and 7 in your book based on the structure of our school day. So I thought this would be some good content for you to be able to easily acquire in this format. And as we start to take a look today, how many bones in the skeleton? Well, enough to make an average skeleton. There are actually 206 bones in the human skeleton, and we are going to learn them all. And so today we're going to be kind of starting with some of those divisions, and then hopefully I will see you on Tuesday and we will pick right up there. Be aware that as we're talking about the skeletal system, it also includes joints, cartilages, and ligaments. So we're going to do joints in a whole separate section and chapter and a whole separate topic. The cartilage we've already seen. Of course, that is the articular cartilage, for example, at the ends of the bones, and you've already seen that. And then, of course, ligaments are dense connective tissue that hold bones together. Of course, that articular cartilage at the ends of our bones that we've taken a look at is actually hyaline cartilage. It also connects our ribs to the sternum, as we're going to see a little later today. And of course, you know what this cartilage looks like under a microscope, that eyeball soup. We also have elastic cartilage, which is part of our skeletal system in places like our ear. We know that's elastic cartilage because our ear goes right back to shape. And then between our vertebrae, as we're going to see today, we also have a more dense fibrocartilage, so it's a little bit more fibrous. And not only is this between our vertebrae, but it makes up the meniscus of our knee. Now today, as we're taking a look at bones, we are going to take a look at some bone markings. So if you take a look at this picture right here, you can see there's these things sticking off of the bones. Sometimes I just call them sticky offy things, but their actual technical name is processes. Now I apologize because I didn't bring any bones home with me to prepare your lesson for today. So I do have a couple of videos for you in the notes and on the online platforms for you to take a look at. So we call these little sticky offy things processes. And so you're going to need to take a look at that. Bones can also have holes in those. Those holes are called foramen. And so we're going to take a look at some of those today as well. All right, so let's get started. So let's look at the anatomy of the skeletal system. And so the first thing you need to know that there is actually two parts, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. Now, when you hear that word axial, you're probably automatically thinking of an axis. And that's exactly right. The axial skeleton goes right down the middle. So start at the top of your head and go straight down. The appendicular skeleton is everything else that is not on that center line. Today, we're going to primarily focus on this axial skeleton and the bones there. This is and also the count of the bones. This is a great picture from your textbook on page 195 that shows what bones we're talking about here and how many in each category. I also put this into your handout for today. All right, so the axial skeleton, again, these are the bones that form the longitudinal axis going right down the middle. Of course, include your skull starting at the top, the bones that make up your neck and your backbone, we call those your vertebral column, and your ribs. Those are the bones of the axial skeleton. And so the first thing we want to take a look at is this backbone or vertebral column. Then we're going to take a look at the ribs. And then when we're back in school, we will take a look at the skull. The appendicular skeleton, by comparison, includes everything else. So anything that is away from that midline, including our shoulder girdle, which is also called our pectoral girdle, where your pectoral muscles are, your pelvic girdle or your hips, arms and legs. And so we're going to go over all of those bones as well. But let's start with that axial skeleton and focus on our vertebral column. Now, this is a side view of the vertebral column, and you can see it's divided into 3 main parts, but 5 total parts. Each section here is colored, and you can see that each has sort of its own unique curvature. And you're going to need to know about those curvatures as well. And so it's when you're born, there's 33 bones. Those fuse together, and I'll tell you about that, and form 26 separate bones. So 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, then the sacrum and the coccyx, 5 and 4. So a total of 9 bones there that are fused together. Now, I know our Health Pro people will know how we remember these quantities of bones and type. Hopefully you're already thinking about that. And so 7, we think about our typical day. Breakfast at 7. Typically we have cereal. So that's 7 cervical vertebrae shown right here in red. Notice their sort of curvature is what we would call convex. That's a curvature that develops as we age. You know, when you were first born, you were a baby, you could not hold up your head. The head just sort of falls forward. Over as we age and are no longer babies anymore, we learn how to hold up our head, and that cervical section of our vertebrae gets that sort of convex, we'd call that curvature. 12 thoracic, because we have lunch at 12. You notice the thoracic vertebrae here in blue. Of course, there are 12 of those, and you can see their curvature is concave, so a little bit inward. That's the primary curvature when you're born. That is basically the only curvature in your back, is sort of like a C-shaped spine. So we would call that a primary curvature. In yellow, the lumbar vertebrae, dinner at 5, so we have 5 of those. Then the sacrum and the coccyx, a total of 9 fused vertebrae. So we think about snack at 9. So breakfast at 7, cereal for breakfast, lunch at 12, dinner at 5, and snack at 9. And that way you can remember all of the vertebrae and quantities. And so you will need to know the structure of the vertebrae, sort of those things that are sticking off. We call those the processes, and the holes or foramen in the vertebrae. So I gave you 2 different options for videos that to take a look at to help you with that, since I didn't bring any vertebrae home with me. All right, so let's take a look at these 7 cervical vertebrae located in our neck. These are our smallest and lightest vertebrae. As you can see right here, and they're numbered from 1 to 7. Going down, they do change and get a little bit larger as you go down. The first 2 cervical vertebrae you do need to know. The first one, of course, is the Atlas, thinking of the Greek god Atlas, who held up the world, because your first cervical vertebrae, Atlas, holds up your world, your head, allows you to move your head around, especially nodding yes and no. Whereas the second cervical vertebrae is called the axis, and it allows your head to turn on your axis so you can shake your head no. And I do have a couple of videos that show those vertebrae in more detail, and we will look at those as soon as we're back at school, hopefully Tuesday. Now, moving right along to the thoracic vertebrae. Remember, they have this you can't see it from this posterior view, but from a side view, you can see the concave curvature of these. These 12 vertebrae have really long spinous process. That's the sticky offy thing in the back, and that's what allows them to meet or articulate with the ribs. The scientific term for when 2 bones meet together is called articulate. And so those are our 12 thoracic vertebrae. Moving right on down the back, these are the largest vertebrae. They have a very large body, and they really hold up our weight. You have 5 of these. These are your lumbar vertebrae. And you'll notice that between these, you can clearly see those fibrocartilage discs, those also called intervertebral discs, that sort of allow you to cushion those vertebrae so that if you're jumping or they're banging together, they're not like getting chipped up or broken up. Now, it is true that people can have a lot of trouble with their discs, especially as they age, having herniated discs and slip discs. So I'm sure you've heard of those things happening to people before. And then last is our sacrum. These are 5 fused vertebrae. This is also known as your butt bone. Typically, these vertebrae fuse together at like 16 to 18. So some of you may have your sacral vertebrae completely fused and some of you may not. So those are those sacral vertebrae. Moving right on down to our tailbone, that's our coccyx or our coccygeal vertebrae. There's 4 of those fused together. Now, typically for you all, yours are probably still separated. These vertebrae typically fuse together between ages 20 and 30. And so that finishes our posterior view of the axial skeleton. Let's take a look at our anterior view of the axial skeleton. And first we're going to take a look at our sternum or breastbone. You can probably feel that bone if you go right in the middle of your chest. It actually has 3 parts, sort of looks like a sword. And we think maybe that they did use those as swords. The top part that articulates only with the first pair of ribs is called your manubrium. Then we have the body, which would be like the blade, and the pointy part, and you can feel this, although you don't want to press on it too hard, the xiphoid process at the bottom of the sternum. Now, right along this sternum, not shown great in this picture, there's cartilage there, where the ribs meet this sternum, and that gives you a little bit of give. So if you kind of press on those ribs, you can feel there's a little bit of give there. If you take a really deep breath, you can feel that the rib cage kind of like spreads out a little bit, and that's because this movement here by this what we call costal cartilage, where the ribs meet the sternum. And then the next thing we wanted to take a look at really quickly is the thorax or the rib cage. So these are those 12 pairs of ribs. They meet in the back or posteriorly with the spinous process of the thoracic vertebrae. The true ribs directly articulate with the sternum through that costal cartilage. And then you have some false ribs. The last 5 ribs shown here in green and blue are called false ribs, and they either articulate indirectly with the sternum. You can see they're not going directly, they're meeting through some other costal cartilage, or they're floating ribs. And so that is the ribs. Now at the top of the ribs, not shown here well, is the only bone in the body that is not articulated. And that is the hyoid bone. And it's not shown here in the skull either. It is a U-shaped bone that allows you, holds your tongue in place. And I'll show you how that one articulates. It's the only bone in the body that doesn't meet with other bones. And so if there's a murder, a strangulation, or something like that, and they're trying to figure out if the person was strangled, they typically look to see if that bone, or that hyoid bone, is broken. Well, I hope this helps you with learning the axial skeleton today. We did the axial skeleton from a posterior view and an anterior view, and did all of the bones there. When we get back to class, we'll take a look at those bones in person and then move on to our appendicular skeleton.